The chess world saw it all at the Norway Chess prestigious high-level tournament going on in Stavanger. Now, that tournament is a 10 rounds, double round robin, where numerous players, including the best in the world, the number one rated player, Magnus Carlsen, the world chess champion, Gukesh, Chinese Super Grandmaster Wei, American Super Grandmasters Fabiano Caruana, Hikaru Nakamura, and Indian prodigy Arjun Iragaisi all competed. And they all have to face each other twice in classical games. And if it's a draw, they go on and play the Armageddon games. In the first round, Magnus Carlsen defeated Grandmaster Gukesh in what seemed like a smooth game, showing that even though that Gukesh is the world chess champion, he is nowhere near the level of Grandmaster Carlsen. However, it now came to the sixth round where they faced off again. And what's going to happen here? We have a lot of exciting news here and moves to get into. So Gukesh was with the white pieces and Carlsen was with black. So pawn to e4, Gukesh opened. And here Carlsen, he goes very solid with e5. And the game saw the Roy Lopez defense. And Carlsen opted for knight f6, the Berlin variation, which shows that Carlsen is actually okay with a draw as he won the previous game. d3. Carlsen plays bishop to c5. Developing his pieces, getting ready to castle. c3. Carlsen castles, Gukesh castles. He played pawn to d6, consolidating his center, opening up his bishop on c8. Very simple chess for now. And after pawn to h3, Carlsen kicks the bishop on b5. Gukesh doesn't want to take, so he humbly retreats. And Carlsen plays h6, cutting out the option of bishop to g5. Rook to e1 was played. Carlsen, he started to go on the attack. b5, kicking the bishop. Bishop c2, bishop b6, dropping back with the bishop, getting out of any d4 attacks already, taking a step back from that kind of funny business. Knight bd2 was played, and Carlsen here carried out a very interesting and instructive maneuver with the move knight e7. The idea is that he now opens the way for the pawn to move to c5 to bring in another trooper in the action in the center here. Also, the knight could be regrouped to g6. Pawn to a4 was played. Gukesh is challenging the queenside formation. Carlsen steps out with rook b8. He steps out of the line. d4 was played. As said, Carlsen regroups his knight to the king side. So Carlsen is slowly bringing his pieces. Now, it already looked like Carlsen was out of any sort of pressure. He came out of the opening completely fine. Knight f1. Carlsen struck. Pawn to c5. Giving Gukesh a choice. How does he resolve this tension? Does he take a pawn? Does he move forward? Or does he leave it as it is? We always have that question when pawns are under pressure. That's known as pawn tension in chess. Knight to g3 was played, and Carlsen more than happily traded in the center. He captured the side pawn, and bishop to b7. So Carlsen now completes his development. All his pieces are out, looking well. His rook could possibly eye down on the b file. And after pawn to d5, Carlsen played pawn to a5. Simply stopping any b4 ideas, perhaps opening up the bishop to a6. Gukesh played bishop to e3, and Carlsen played a move, a finesse. Bishop to c8, as the bishop on b7 was actually no longer doing anything here. And the bishop on c8, it looks towards the king side and it opens the rook. So Carlsen, in his typical fashion, is starting to outplay Gukesh. He was starting to show who's the boss here. Gukesh played move b3. And that move was a very sad move to make. His bishop now is actually sidelined to this part of the board. Carlsen, he took on e3. He pounced with his knight, knight to f4. So already the knight is in white's position. It's looking not so pleasant here. Bishop to c6 was played. But if you notice, the bishop is actually, it looks very strong. It's cutting squares, but it's not disturbing black in any way. Carlsen played rook to b4. The rook puts pressure on the center and on the b file. Queen to c2 was played by Gukesh. And Carlsen played a very exquisite move, which Gukesh said after the game that he didn't realize how strong that move was. Pawn to g6, cutting out squares from Gukesh's knight on g3, and ready to advance on the king side. King to h1. Before anything, bishop to a6. Carlsen improves his bishop, cutting some squares. Queen to a2 was played, so Gukesh is attacking the a pawn. He's already not feeling comfortable. Bishop to d3, played by Carlsen, putting some pressure on the pawn on e4. Knight to d2 defending, and Carlsen strikes h5. So Carlsen always has a feeling for when to improve his position and so on. Queen takes a5 was played. Queens were traded, and now pawn to h4, putting a question to the knight. Gukesh played rook to a4, realizing that if black actually takes the knight, white recaptures and his knight is under attack and cannot move due to the protection of the bishop. So he actually realized that Carlsen cannot take his knight as yet. Carlsen played rook f8, bringing in his sleeping trooper on f8. Rook to a2 was played, and simply king to g7. Carlsen is waiting for what Gukesh is playing. There's no rush to take this knight at all. Rook to a7 was played, and now rook to d4. Rook defends the bishop, opens up the other rook, and perhaps now he's ready to take. Knight f3 was played by Gukesh. So here Carlsen is completely winning, but with time coming low, the pressure, the clock getting on their nerves, anything could happen here. So the idea is, he's attacking the rook here. Carlsen, he didn't fail, he took the knight. And after fg3, his rook is hanging, his knight is hanging, and Carlsen has to give back one of the pieces. He played knight takes h3. And after g takes h3, bishop takes on e4, pinning the knight. King to h2 was played. And now, Carlsen here simply could have taken on f3 and gotten his pawn going with e4. However, Carlsen played rook to d1. Pawn to g4 was played, creating some breathing room for his king on g3. He took the pawn on d5, and now Carlsen is up a clear pawn, and Gukesh's position looks fragile. This should be a routine win for the world number one. Gukesh is staying in the game, rook e2. Knight f4, attacking the rook. Rook to c2, possibly eyeing some counterplay against the king combined with the a7 rook. Carlsen brought up his king to f6. h4 was played, so Gukesh is taking away some squares. King to e6 was played, so Carlsen brings his king to the center. Carlsen knows his endgame rules. Knight to g5 was played. The king comes up. Rook to a5. The king goes down even more forward. So Carlsen is brave. His king is coming up in the center of the position. However, his pawns are not being left so well protected. Rook to a4. King goes up again. Rook to f2. And now Carlsen. Position was very well, but Carlsen here, he let a lot of his advantage slip by playing the quick pawn move, f6. Move pawn to f5 would have been better. Taking away more squares, and these pawns are getting rolling. Pawn to f6. But rook f3 check was missed by Carlsen. Now the problem with moving your king up so much is your king gets fragile to all kinds of attacks. King e2. Rook a2 checks. Carlsen's king is in some problems. Rook has to block with d2. Trades were made at knight e4 check. Attacking two pawns already. Gukesh starts to see some hope. Maybe he could escape. It's a draw. And now king to e2 was played. And Gukesh found the move. King to g3. So the game is coming down to the end. Time low. Nerves in the air. Players sweating. What's going on? Pawn to d5, attacking the knight. Carlsen gives the pawn, and rook f8. Carlsen now has given back the material, but he's ready to go with his pawns. Gukesh, he gives check. King E1. There's 97. Attacking the rook and the pawn. What to do with Carlsen? What to do with Blackhead? Carlsen now, in the heat of the moment, seconds on the everyone watching, stakes on the line, a lot to prove. Carlsen blundered with knight to E2. Gukesh simply took the knight, took his rook. Gukesh is up at knight. However, after D4, Carlsen thought his pawns are going. Knight comes back to the rescue. Knight E6. Pawn D3. And knight to C5. But the idea that every pawn goes is actually knight to E4, not allowing D1 due to knight C3 check, winning the queen. That is what Carlsen perhaps missed. King to E3. Now knight to A4. Knight wants to come back to either C3 or B2 to stop the queen and square on B1. E4, Carlsen goes. Gukesh advances with A5. His pawns are rolling. Carlsen takes. Gukesh takes. After king D2. Knight B2. The knight is trying to stop the pawns on his own. Carlsen is grasping at straws, trying somehow. After E3. Knight C4, check. Check. Attacking the king. Keep an eye on the pawn. After king E2. The move that was now played that made Carlsen lose his mind. And after Gukesh played king F4, Carlsen went boom. He banged the table with his hand. He was angry at himself. He just got up, he shook his hand, and he walked off. What a game. Carlsen was winning, and all of a sudden, he lost. Now, cannot stop the unavoidable capture of the pawn. And then this pawn is securely guarded. White simply is going to make a queen. Gukesh took his first win against Magnus Carlsen in classical Norway chess high-level tournament. It was unbelievable. Carlsen didn't know what went on. But even though Carlsen lost and was very angry, on his way out to pat Gukesh on his back as a sign of respect, that was an intense game. If you like that coverage, be sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned for more content like this.